Hello, data people. All right, so today what we're going to be going over is Power Query. Probably one of the most important tools that Power BI has in order to get your data reportable and ready to go. So we're going to be going through a very low-level example of how we can clean a very messy file and get it into a reportable data set so that we can start reporting on some data. So let's go ahead and look at what our data file is going to look like. So the scenario that we're in, let's just lay the groundwork for kind of the scenario that we're in. So let's say that we have a system that is housing all of our employee targets for a month. So we've got a system that management is entering in the employee targets for various employees within this system, and the way that the system exports that data is in a file like this. So there's no other way that you can get at that data outside of exporting it. And then when you export from the system export looks like this. So what essentially the way that this is supposed to be read is any asterisk means that it's the same goal from the previous month before, right? So this asterisk in 2018-06 would mean that it's the same value for 2018-05, so on and so forth, right? So same for here, same as 33. So that's how you read this file. But in Power BI, this is junk. You can't report on this. This is unhelpful. This is not a reportable type of file. You have asterisks that are supposed to be dollar values. How are you supposed to report on that? You've got a date in every column. How are you supposed to relate to a single date field? Right? This is just a mess of a file that is not how Power BI is built to report at all. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go through a quick tutorial of some of the steps that Power BI or some of the functions that Power BI's Power Query has to offer so that we can get this into a reportable file and that we can start tracking our employee target performance. So let's get started. So this is going to be the file that we're working with. Let's go ahead and open up Power BI. So go ahead and open up a blank Power BI file. Once you've got that opened up, of course, we're going to go to the Transform Data button. So in Transform Data, this is essentially the same thing as Power Query Editor. They just called it Transform Data, but this opens up your Power Query Editor. So go ahead and push that button. I've got my little date table in here. I've got another video out there if you want to know how to create that, but not the focus of this video. So what we're going to be wanting to do is we are going to want to add a new source. We're going to want to make sure that we go out to grab our new file that we're going to be working with. So let's go ahead and add a new source. And once that window pops open, go ahead and select that file that you're going to work with. So again, you can see it's going to come in very messy, right? Not at all how we need it. Not fun for Power BI to be reportable like this, but very easy for Power BI to get it reportable. So go ahead and push OK on that. And great. So when we get into Power Query, so let me go through some of the basics of Power Query, and then we'll get into how we can transform this file. So up top in our little code bar, or our where we can type, I don't know what to call this, but where we can type in this little bar up here, this is going to be the step that we are on. It's going to show you the code. What Power Query uses is it uses M code is the coding language that it uses. It's going to show you the M code that makes up that step. So within this step, this applied step side on the right, it's going to list all of the steps that are happening to your file during the data load process. So currently, what we're doing is we start with a source. So we're starting on our source. We're getting our file from this source location with these parameters, right? So this is the M code setting our source. The next step, almost all the time, these are going to be your first two steps. Almost every time, source is always going to be your first step, and then this one that comes right after that is almost always going to be promoted headers. It's just a default within Microsoft. They just almost always promote headers. And so going from this first step to the second step, you can see what that does too, right? So on our first step, when we first bring in our file source, we can see that our row 1 starts on row 1. So it's got our headers included as data. We don't want that, and that's typically how Power BI reads every file. So Microsoft's just defaulted to, whenever a new file gets added, just automatically promote headers, right? So then there our header rows are automatically moved up into that header row. So the same kind of thing with just some default behavior. Another step that Microsoft will almost always do on adding a new source is try to automatically determine what data type that data field is. Sometimes this works, sometimes it doesn't. I usually, especially with a lot of fields like this, I'll usually cancel out of that automatically generated change data type because it might just cause some errors down the road in some transformations that we're doing because of it might have transformed it or assumed that it was some data type, but it was in fact not that data type, and so down the line you're going to get errors. So sometimes I'll remove that. Sometimes it's helpful, but it's up to you. But the ones that I'll always keep is the source and promoted headers. All right. So now we've got our data ready. We kind of know what we're looking at within Power Query. Let's go ahead and start doing some steps to get this reportable. So in Power BI, essentially what we need is we need a single column with our date so that we can relate our date to our date table and have that filterable. And then we need each of these values associated with that date in that row. So essentially what we need to do is we need to somehow get each of these columns and the values in the column into 2 rows of their own. So we need a date column and then we need a value column. The way that Power BI can do that is we can unpivot our data. So super easy, with one click of a button we can generate those 2 columns. All we need to do is select the column that we want to determine what we're going to be unpivoting on. So we want to have all of these columns, so we don't want our ID to go anywhere. We want this to be our row level context, right? So let's select our ID, and then we want to unpivot all of these columns to the right. So every other date column within this data we want to assign into a single column for dates, right? So we'll have this column selected, and then up top in the Power Query Editor window, right next to the Home button, there's a Transform ribbon. We're going to click on that Transform ribbon, and then underneath that in this Any Column section, this is where a bunch of stuff gets really powerful. We're going to go ahead and click on the Unpivot Columns dropdown. And then again, while we have the column ID selected, we're going to want to go ahead and click on that dropdown and then click Unpivot Other Columns. So again, we've got this selected, so we're unpivoting all of the other columns we do not have selected. So go ahead and unpivot. And voila, there we go. So now we've got our dates. All of those date columns are now in one single date column. So now we can create a date relationship to this single column. And you can see each of those employee IDs are now duplicated for every value that they had across in the columns, right? And so the way that this will work when we unpivot, the way that it will get sorted, is it's going to sort by the ID first, since this is going to be the ID, and then each of those columns one after the other. So it's going to be that first row column, or the first row as a column, the first column as its first row, the second column as the second row, so on and so forth, right? So it'll organize it nice and neatly for us in a categorical way, in the way that we would kind of expect it to, which will give us some value in just a second for our next step. But again, so you can see that that value is just associated with the month that it was entered. So as opposed to being in a column for column year 2022 month 5 with a value of 0 for this individual all the way over to the right, we've got just right here in those nice data, 2 columns of data. All right, so for our next step, what we want to do after this is, even though we've got our date here, we can see that it's messy, right? So we can't relate anything to this right now because it's still just a text column. We need to be able to make this a date column, but if we try that, it's not a date yet, so we can't force it to be a date because there's some errors with how the syntax of a date could be recognized. So what we want to do is we want to just clean this column up to make it be able to be a recognizable date. So if we go ahead and just right click on this column, it's going to pop up a bunch of options for what we can do to this column. We're going to want to go ahead and replace values. Let's go ahead and just replicate the first part of that value. So at the front end, we can see that it's an equal sign and then a double quote. So that's the value we want to find. So we want to find equal sign double quote, and we want to replace it with nothing. So we just want to clear that out essentially. And then there you go. You can see that in that column, that leading equal sign quote has now been replaced with nothing. And then let's do this one more time to replace the double quote at the end. Replace value quote, replace with nothing. Okay, and then there you go. Now you can see that that's cleared out as well. So now we've got just a clean little date with a month. And now if we want to go ahead and change the data type, the way that we can change the data type on the column is just click on this little ABC, Right next to the name is going to be how you can set the data type for a column. And we're going to go ahead and choose date. And now it can recognize it as a date field. So you can see we're quickly moving from having that really ugly Excel file like this, with having our dates up here, with having these double quotes and an equal sign. We now have a file that is getting us an actual date. So it's now we've got an actual date that we can relate on our date table to. Now we just got to clean up our values so that we can know what value is tied to each of those dates. Now we're getting to the kind of easy part, because we're pretty much done with all of this. Now we just got to make sure that we can clean up the data a bit more, and then we'll be good to go. So what we want to do is we don't care about all these blank values, right? We just don't care about them. If they don't have a goal for that value, that's fine. We don't need to see it because we don't need to report on a nothing value. So we can go ahead and filter out those blanks. So if you filter on the value column, or if you filter on any column, you'll see the list of values within that column. So I've just unselected blank. So in that step, we've now filtered every value is not blank. Great. Well, now we're hitting our next issue, right? So our next big issue is with this asterisk. What the hell do we do about this asterisk? How do we get this into a number to reference that previous month? Well, we need a number on there. We can't just report an asterisk value, right? And so what we need to do here is, again, we need to do a little replace. We'll do a little trick so that we can replace this star, this asterisk. We'll replace it with null. So instead of blank or nothing this time, we're going to replace it with null. And the reason why we replace it with null is because null is not 0, right? We just want to make sure to replace our value with null in this column, and then we will fill down. So what we're going to do, again, going back to what I said initially about kind of when we unpivot, it's unpivoting by ID and then chronological order of those columns. And since those columns are formatted and sorted top to bottom by date, we can drop down. We can fill down this last value into the next value. So let's go through a better example here. So if we look at this individual, so this employee 6493, on November 1st, they had a goal of 8,300. They had an asterisk for that goal for the next 3 months. And we know that because we replaced asterisks with null, right? So they had that same goal for those 3 months, but we currently show null. But what we can do is we can fill down this value for the null values. So what fill down does, or fill up does, is it's going to fill the null or blank values until it hits a next value. So super neat, especially for this scenario. We can fill this 8,300 down until it gets to that 8,300. And then same thing with this 11. We can fill this 11 down until it gets to that 11. And then this 22. We can fill this down until it hits this 1, right? So it's just we can fill down, and then we've got a value in all of our months that the target file was expecting. So a asterisk means it's the previous month's value, and it's just all the way down. So let's go ahead and do that. We can, again, just right-click on the value column, press fill, and we're going to fill down. And so now there you go. So now you can see that we've removed all of those null values by filling down up until the next value. So we've filled down all of the blanks. So we've replicated that previous month's value for what the asterisks mean in our goal file. And now we're able to report on our target goals. We've got a month to link to our date table. We've got a value for our target goal. And that's all we need. Now we have a reportable file that we can report target employees against what they do for their actual values or actual dollars that they brought in. One last step that we're going to want to do here is make sure that our value types, our data types, are the correct data type. And let's go ahead and name our columns as well. Let's go ahead with employee ID. This is going to be month's goal and goal value. Great. So now that we're done, so again on the right side we can see that all of those applied steps. So again, if we just scroll through, we can see where we started, right? So we started with this super messy file. Again, not what we wanted, not reportable. But then just with some quick 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, with 10 steps, that's all we need. We've now got a reportable Power BI file that we can get this looped into our model to now show and report against actual goal values. So once we're all good there, we can go ahead and push close and apply. It's going to load our data in. And again, since I've got my date table already loaded in, what I'm going to do here is just show you a little sample of how quick and easy it is to kind of get this goal stuff. Once all the ETL stuff and Power Query is set, how easy it is to throw it on the page. Right, so now that we've got that, let's go ahead and throw our year. Let's put month and year on here. Let's go into a matrix. Let's throw our employee ID here. And our target. So very quickly, we can see what our employees' targets are, what kind of they're going to be growth rates are, how our targets are looking in terms of how quickly they're growing. Are they being achieved? Are we setting targets that are too high? So it's very easy, again, just super quick to get all of that value. And then there you go, right? So now you can just see kind of where each of your employees are performing, or how each of those targets are being set. Are they being set with some unreasonable goals? Are the goals reasonable? Right, and so here you go. Just that quick, that easy. But I hope that was helpful. That is just a very, very, very high overview of some of the power that Power Query can do. I will certainly be posting more on Power Query, but just wanted to get kind of my feet wet on getting a video out there for some great stuff the Power Query can do. Let me know if this was helpful. If there are any specific issues you guys are having with your Power Query or ETLing with your reports, let me know. Let me know in the comments, and we can get another video out there specifically to that. Other than that, I hope this was helpful, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks.